Good day, and welcome to today's webinar, in which we'll discuss the role of Cloud ERP in enterprise optimization. Today's webinar is brought to you by CFE Media and sponsored by Oracle NetSuite. We'll be joined by Eric Kimberling, CEO and founder, Third Stage Consulting Group, and by Chris DeVault, Manager of Software Selection, Panorama Consulting Solutions. I'm Kevin Parker, a Senior Contributing Editor with CFE Media. Today's webinar will include a software demo from Oracle NetSuite on the productive use of dashboards, workflows, and key performance indicators. Even small to mid-sized manufacturers and distributors today need industry-specific, customer-centric, and global capabilities. The question is, what does that mean when it comes to 1. Implementations? How do implementations change with cloud-resident ERP? 2. Customization. What kinds of contingencies can justify the additional expense and risk of customizing an ERP system as opposed to more simple configuration? 3. Best practices. What's the right balance for users between uniformity and flexibility? 4. IT infrastructure. In a world of self-service applications, what do users need to ensure productive use of ERP? And 5, digital transformation. How does ERP fit in the world of the industrial Internet of Things, analytics, and artificial intelligence? More generally, our discussion will take place amid the ongoing digital transformation of the industrial enterprise. Thanks for joining us today, and stay tuned to hear from our expert panel. To get the best results from the webcast platform, please make note of the following as you participate in today's event. If you are having technical problems, click on the question mark at the top right-hand corner of the screen to bring up a list of system checks to make before escalating to an online technician. If you experience issues with the slides or audio, please refresh the browser or click the Refresh Media button directly under the presenter's headshot. You can control volume settings by adjusting either your computer's volume or that of the webcast platform. If a technician is needed, type a message into the Ask Question box and someone will get to you as quickly as possible. Answers to technical questions will be in the Answered Questions box on the left-hand side of the screen. The Ask a Question box is also used to ask the speakers questions. You may ask questions at any time during the presentation, and we encourage you to do so. We'll get to as many as time allows. To download the presentation slides, use the Event Resources area on the left-hand side of the screen. This webcast is being recorded, including the Q&A session. A certificate of completion is available for each participant to download at the webinar's end. We'll post the archive on our websites in the next several days and send you an email with a link to it once it's there. The next several slides include some basic definitions related to ERP, ERP market size, and cloud. ERP is the system of record and single source of truth in the industrial enterprise. Next slide, please. The cloud ERP market is growing at about 10% a year, a notable increase from even just a few years ago. Next slide. Cloud computing, like the smartphone, has significantly changed how we interact with computers in both commercial and industrial markets. We'll begin by asking our panel members about the key topics of today's webinar. Following that will be the software application demo of some of the latest Oracle NetSuite functionality. Finally, Eric and Chris will each share their insights into the rapidly evolving world of enterprise cloud computing. You'll also have a chance to ask them about these and other enterprise topics. I'd now like to introduce our speakers. Eric Kimberling is CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting Group. Eric is a recognized and respected independent ERP systems expert who also has served as an expert witness in high-profile industry legal cases, representing both government and private companies. Eric is the author of An Expert's Guide to ERP Success. His extensive experience includes ERP software selection, organizational change management, implementation project management, and benefits realization. He has worked with high-profile companies that include Nucor Steel, Fisher and Paykel Healthcare, Kodak, Samsonite, Coors, Boeing, Duke Energy, and Lucent Technologies. Chris DeVault is Software Selection Manager with Panorama Consulting Solutions. Chris has more than 15 years of experience participating in projects aimed at process improvement, supply chain optimization, business development, and ERP selection. He has also managed cross-functional teams and coordinated relationships with enterprise software vendors. As a sales manager and consultant, Chris has worked both sides of software acquisitions and implementation processes, acting as a subject matter expert in more than 250-plus ERP projects. At Panorama, Chris works with clients across the software selection lifecycle, from process documentation and improvement, vendor management, through negotiating software license agreements. Eric and Chris, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Eric, let me ask you the first question. With a cloud-based enterprise system, how do the options for ERP implementations change? Is it as simple as either a big bang or a stepped approach? And are the options, realistically speaking, different for SMEs, small to mid-sized enterprises, and the very largest global companies?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. That's a great question, and thanks everyone for being here today. I'd say the approach to cloud implementations does and doesn't change at the same time. So I'll start with the things that are different with cloud implementations. First of all, when we're talking about cloud implementation, typically there's a faster path to turning the technology on, so to speak. So getting the technology up and running is typically a bit faster with cloud solutions because you don't have to worry about installing the software and doing quite as much initial setup just to get the software up and running. That's on the technical side, but when we talk about the business process and the organizational adoption of the software, all that heavy lifting that goes behind that process is still something that needs to happen. So, and that side of it, that's where I say no, the implementation doesn't really change because the people and process side of things still need to go through the hard work and rolling up your sleeves to get your operations to adapt to the software and your people to adapt to the software at the same time. As it relates to, whether you go phase or big bang or whether it varies for small to larger companies, all I can say is the bottom line is it really depends on the organization. For some smaller organizations that don't have a super robust or well-established business processes or technologies yet, a big bang approach can be easier to stomach or easier to swallow in those cases. But for larger organizations where they've got pretty well-entrenched processes and systems that are going to be harder to change, oftentimes they find that a phased approach is more realistic or more suitable to them. So it really depends on your risk profile, how much change you're willing to go through, how much benefit you're looking for, your vision for IT and kind of how IT fits into the organization. All that stuff factors into which approach makes the most sense for you.
Well, thanks, Eric. Chris, when Cloud ERP was first introduced, one possible objection that was voiced was whether having a system that resided in a public cloud precluded opportunities for customization. My question to you is this a legitimate concern? In today's world and with today's systems, is customization ever a viable opportunity? I've heard it said that it's better to adapt the business process to the system once decided upon, rather than vice versa.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And I do think that there is a healthy mix to your statement there, and it's really it's important to understand where the customization is really needed. So when you're looking at current installs and where customizations have happened per that client, it's really because of limitations of the legacy system. It's also because of undefined processes and workarounds, therefore not aligning with the process themselves. So it certainly reduces the amount and need for customization. We do have to understand how customization is going to be done in the new cloud environment. Each vendor is a little bit different on their technology tool sets and their environments that this can be done in. we still see customization and certainly enhancement and configuration, heavy configuration, as a portion of these projects. You're not going to avoid it, but you have to understand how to do it, why it's needed, and how you're going to accomplish it within your internal IT resource allocation.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Eric, large companies have some choices to make when it comes to ERP as to whether it is better to have a single instance of ERP across all locations and units, or to have multiple instances of ERP reporting into corporate financials. How has that discussion evolved, and does the cloud change it at all? And I think some other important factors are whether a company is multinational. And again, I'd like to compare those largest corporations with the SMEs. Do the SMEs have the same kind of factors to consider?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we find that it really depends on the size of the organization, as you allude to, Kevin. That whether you're a big multinational company or whether you're a small or mid-sized company, you're going to probably come up with different answers or different paths that make sense for you. For a larger organization that's let's say they're heavily decentralized, they've grown through M&A acquisition, perhaps they're a global organization, and they're really trying to move to a common operating platform and a common operating strategy, and they want to move to a shared service model with HR and IT and other functions. If that's the case, then a cloud solution can oftentimes enable that a little bit more quickly than in other cases. And the other case being if you're a company that's decentralized and you want to remain that way, and you value flexibility and being nimble and being able to pivot to respond to evolving market demands and customer needs, then that's where the multiple instances or multiple systems in some cases may make more sense, just to give you that flexibility to adapt to different markets, different product lines, different business units, all that good stuff. So you really have to look at the profile of your organization to determine that. And last thing I'll say is, as it relates to small and mid-sized organizations, I think the good news with them is I think you've got a pretty healthy mix where you can go either way using cloud a little bit more easily. And what I mean by that is you can easily standardize operations and create a common platform and a pretty standardized set of business processes and technologies that allow you to scale for growth and maybe start off on the right foot heading in that direction. And if you want flexibility at that size, I think it's a little bit easier to do that, in a single instance model as well. So, at the end of the day, I guess the bottom line is you look at the profile of the organization, what your organizational goals are, what your culture is, what you want it to be, what your operating model is going to look like in the future, and then align the right solution to fit that going forward.
Thanks, Eric. Chris, how difficult is it for an SME to have the IT capabilities in place to support an ERP system and its users? I mean, self-service and easy-to-use applications have cut down the need for training across a wide range of applications. I remember when I was first introduced to ERP, so many years ago, they must have had a dozen cassette tapes that they showed us and really extensive training. When I'm given a new application today, they kind of say, here it is, let us know if you have any questions. Has ERP evolved in the same way? And what about the capabilities in terms of infrastructure that the actual company itself needs?
Sure, and you're kind of alluding to end user adoption there, and being trained on the right instance and your exact data is very important. So taking those extra steps to really educate the end user on how to use the software. It's also very important to educate those end users on what the expectation and the purpose is around the use of ERP. All too often, people on the shop floor or people out in the field and in sales, they don't understand the ripple effect of the data that they either enter or do not enter, or maybe haphazardly entered into the system. There's certainly a ripple effect that goes throughout the organization there. So yeah, it's very, very important to have the right infrastructure in place, whether it be cloud or on premise, to establish the right training methodology and end user adoption there. It's important to iterate that the cloud will not eliminate all the infrastructure needs, your IT resources and internal needs, they may be reduced and they may be allocated differently. So it's important to set those expectations and understand what those resources and infrastructure needs to look like.
Good. Thanks, Chris. Eric, the final question of this segment is for you. There's just so much going on in the world of automation and on actual plant floors, as well as in the business enterprise, than there has been in many years. We've got IoT, analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, and they're making available many new kinds of structured and unstructured data. In your opinion, are ERP vendors ready and able to ingest this data such that ERP will remain the single source of truth and also act as a platform for decision support?
That's a great question, and I guess my knee-jerk reaction to that would be that I don't know that anyone's really fully ready for all the masses of data that are coming from Internet of Things and analytics, artificial intelligence, and whatnot. But I think the ERP vendors are more ready than anyone in terms of how do we create that backbone or that central repository for that data to go. The good thing is the ERP industry has been around for a long time and has dealt with different emerging trends that have come and go, and all along the way, ERP systems have continued to be somewhat the backbone of modern organizations at any given point in time. So I think the key now for software vendors is to figure out what they want to be. Do they want to be a software vendor that provides those emerging technologies native within their applications, or do they want to be more of an open architecture that can integrate with other third-party systems and data sources and whatnot, or is it a combination of both? And I think that's what a lot of vendors are struggling with right now is what do we want to be when we grow up, and how do these emerging technologies affect us, and what exactly is our role in that? What I'd say to that, though, is more importantly, maybe for this audience, is if you're considering a cloud solution or any other sort of ERP system, you really just need to figure out, you need to be aware of these emerging trends, whether it's the Internet of Things or AI or whatever we're talking. You need to be aware of it, but also understand, you may be thinking ahead of where your organization is ready to go. And so understanding how long realistically it'll take you to get there to fully embrace these technologies and integrate them into your organization and change your people and processes to adapt and make use of these technologies, that's an important decision point, an important understanding to have before you just jump right in and start, figuring ways to deploy Internet of Things or whatever the technology may be.
Yes, it's very interesting. Well, thanks, Eric and Chris. I look forward to speaking with you again following the demo coming up. We'd now like to share with you a demo of capabilities resident in Oracle NetSuite ERP, addressing issues already raised in today's discussion. For anyone not familiar with NetSuite, it was founded in 1998 as the first cloud ERP company. 20 years later, its offices are found in 15 countries, with more than 7,000 employees and 16,000 customers, and with more than 3,000 new customers in the last year. The video addresses important questions related to an ERP system, including, is the ERP system cloud-based? Is it roles-based? Does it provide easy access to relevant KPIs based on those roles? What types of reporting does it support? And what are some leading implementation practices? Please launch the video.
Hello, and welcome to today's demo, NetSuite for Manufacturing. As a quick introduction to myself, my name is Matt Weisner. I'm a manufacturing industry principal within our Supply Chain Center of Excellence here at Oracle NetSuite, where I've spent the last 3 years. Prior to coming to Oracle NetSuite, I spent 4 years at Plex Systems, and prior to that, I spent more than 10 years working in the manufacturing and supply chain management industry, serving in roles from operations management up through buyer, planner, master scheduler, and ultimately director of supply chain for a large manufacturer. Throughout my career, I've been fortunate to spend time in multiple industries. I'm excited to share with you a little bit more about manufacturing within NetSuite. Today's agenda involves 5 points. We're going to discuss the NetSuite Stack and the building blocks that we deliver at NetSuite. We'll discuss the Suite Success methodology and how we deliver our product. We'll discuss the NetSuite Stairway for manufacturing and how manufacturers can scale within the NetSuite cloud. we'll have a demo of the product where we will get to dive into some of the different roles and see what people actually do in their day-to-day interactions within NetSuite. Lastly, we will review how what we have seen helps us to boost supply chain productivity. Let's start by discussing the NetSuite Stack. NetSuite was born in the cloud and was designed to address an entire business. NetSuite is cloud first and cloud only, meaning it has all of the tenets you would associate with a real cloud solution. Access using any device, anytime, anywhere, consumer-oriented, easy for anyone to pick up and use without extensive training. The NetSuite Cloud, fit for purpose and always up to date in real time. NetSuite's Suite Cloud platform offers unrivaled levels of personalization, customization, and development, all within a framework that ensures security, scalability, globalization, and built-in capability of being kept up to date with the latest versions of the software. Our cloud has led to a vibrant ecosystem of NetSuite practitioners and developers providing real business solutions, and everyone is on the same version of the same product. That is the power of the cloud for your company. NetSuite is able to deliver functionality that every business needs to be successful, such as HR, core financial, supply chain management, customer relationship management, and e-commerce. NetSuite is global. We're able to handle the difficult task of going global with features such as multi-book, multi-language, multi-currency, and multi-country tax compliant. NetSuite was built for your industry. We make sure that NetSuite has the functionality needed to support industries such as manufacturing, wholesale distribution, software, and retail, to name a few. NetSuite continues to focus on providing business intelligence that's useful and consumable by you and your users. Suite success is the combination of a multi-year transformation effort to combine the NetSuite Unified Suite, 20 years of industry-leading practices, a new customer engagement model, and business optimization methods to a unified industry cloud solution. This means that we've taken all of our experience in implementing thousands upon thousands of customers, and we've said, how can we pre-configure our product and our methods in order to deliver an implementation that is much closer to the goal line? By implementing our Suite Success leading practices, many times we can get folks through phase 1 and up and running in less than 100 days. Now, I want to introduce you to the NetSuite Stairway for manufacturing. We want our customers to leverage the capabilities they need to generate the value they want by offering a stairway for manufacturers. We allow customers to determine what levels of capability they need in order to fulfill their business goals, rather than needing to implement everything in one large implementation. We allow customers to implement and to go live in stages. We deliver value quickly, we gain important buy-in from users within the company, rather than burning out your most important resources with implementation fatigue. While we are striving to develop functionality such as industrial IoT, as you see in the dominate level of the stairway here, we also understand that many customers are just not quite to that level yet. Now let's take a look at what different users would experience within NetSuite, starting on the shop floor with Dave Harrington. As you can see, Dave Harrington is logged into what we call our Advanced Manufacturing Tablet interface. We can see here that Dave is logged in, and here is his work queue. Now, Dave's work queue has different filters, and today Dave is working in this SFO assembly work center, and so you can see that he is filtered on that work center. The nice thing about Dave's work queue is that it can be sorted by any of the columns that exist within this view. The other thing that we'll notice is that Dave is currently working on work order 295. That's indicated by the green highlight here on the work queue. Let's take a look at work order 295 and what Dave's got going on. Once we click on that work order from the work queue, we can now see that Dave has started this work order and he's been running since 9:26 a.m. and the current time is 9:34 a.m. There are 8 minutes that have progressed since Dave started this work order. Now, Dave has many options here on the tablet. He can issue material, record scrap, and record downtime. The key to understand here is that anything Dave does on the shop floor within his work center, he can report that here. And this is what's going to give us the data that we want to allow us to drive continuous improvement and production reporting within NetSuite. One other key feature is this information icon in the top right of Dave's tablet interface. Dave can click on this and see any instructions related to what Dave has to do here at this work center. Let's say Dave wants to issue some material. He needs to issue this PCD002. Dave will simply click on that material issue button, enter the quantity that he wishes to issue, locate the bin that that material is located in, and click OK. Now, if Dave were to incur scrap at this work center, Dave can choose any scrap code that's visible here, or he can use the other button to choose from the list of reasons that are available. We're going to go ahead and choose electrical damage as our scrap reason. We'll go ahead and click OK, and then it'll prompt us for the quantity of scrap that Dave's incurred. And right now, we're just going to choose 1. Now, as with any production environment, there are times where we do incur downtime. If Dave were to incur downtime here, let's say for machine breakdown, Dave can just select the machine breakdown option, and what you'll notice is that the background of his tablet turned yellow. And what's happened here, open downtime has started at 9:38 a.m. Again, we can still see what time we started our work order, how much time has elapsed, as well as the current system time of the work order. Essentially, when I start downtime, I'm starting another clock that's allowing me to track how much time I spend. Once Dave's issue has been resolved and he's no longer in a downtime state, he simply comes to his tablet, clicks on the same downtime reason, and that takes him out of downtime. You'll also know that the background of the tablet turned green, indicating that we are now in a production status. Once Dave's produced all the parts that he needs to produce, he will simply enter production. To do that, Dave will come in and click on the Enter Production button, select the quantity he wants to produce, and click OK. Juan Garcia is Dave's supervisor. His dashboard shows him things like production downtime categories and production loss or scrap categories, as well as other reports like operating reports. One nice thing is Juan can hover over these reports and see that he's had 12 pieces scrapped for electrical damage, as well as 4 pieces scrapped for visual damage. Juan works for Melissa Seaver, who's our manufacturing production manager. Now, Melissa's involved in multiple different areas, so you can see that her dashboard is full of different information that helps her drive business on a day-to-day basis. Things such as work orders completed and work orders released. In addition to her KPIs, Melissa also has reminders, so she can understand how many work orders need to be built, how many items need to be placed on purchase order, how many work orders have past due operations, and any lots that are about to expire. It's very important to understand, for Melissa to have a complete view of her business, she needs more than just a main dashboard. She has dashboards related to shipping, and here she can see information about fulfillments, customer orders that need to be fulfilled, as well as KPIs directly related to shipping. She also has a dashboard for receiving, and her receiving dashboard shows her open POs that need to be received, as well as inventory status and weekly receipt history. Melissa also has a dashboard for receiving. Her receiving dashboard shows her things like how many orders need to be received, what's my historical receipt history, what's my current inventory look like, and which purchase orders need to be received. Now, Melissa also has an inventory dashboard, which shows her data directly related to inventory status as well as inventory values. Melissa also has a manufacturing dashboard. Her manufacturing dashboard shows her reminders about work orders that need to be built, as well as capacity information about her work centers. Finally, I want to show you Melissa's planning dashboard. This dashboard shows her items available to sell, including how much is on hand, on order, on sales order, and available to sell. Now let's take a look at Larry Nelson. Larry is a senior executive or the CEO. He has a dashboard that's completely different from the other users that we've discussed. Larry is interested in company-wide financials, things like revenue and expenses. Larry also has multiple different dashboards for different areas. For example, Larry has a board metrics dashboard. On Larry's board metrics dashboard, he has a manufacturing operations focused KPI portlet. And you can see things like created work orders and order fill rates. It's important to understand that these dashboards are completely customizable. Let's say Larry is really interested in this operating cash flow KPI meter, and he wants it above the income KPI meter. All he can do is grab that and drag and drop it. He can move that meter anywhere he wants within his dashboard. Now, let's say that Larry is really interested in the KPI number for income of $899,000 this month. Larry can simply just click into that number and it'll take him straight to his income statement report so that he can review where that $899,000 is coming from. If he wants even more detail, he can click right into that number and he can get to his income statement detail report. Now, this is going to provide all the detail behind the actual individual invoices that are making up that dollar amount of $899,000. Here in these dashboards, you're seeing the content that we deliver through our Suite Success methodology in order to get you closer to the goal line, as we talked about before. As we've just seen, NetSuite has the ability to help you boost your supply chain productivity. NetSuite provides a single source of truth, which is critical for supply chains that have multiple stakeholders and entities. Through personalized, process-driven dashboards, internal resources have the ability to act and react quickly and with purpose. In addition, access to vendor and customer portals from anywhere at any time via the cloud help to streamline communications across your supply chain. I'd like to say thank you for your time today. We here at Oracle NetSuite are looking forward to growing together with your business.
Welcome back, everyone. Having seen the product demo, we know that NetSuite solutions address key considerations that help users succeed in the age of the digitalization of the industrial enterprise. Please send us your questions. As promised, let's now see what our panel members think. Eric, welcome back, and please go ahead.
Well, thanks, Kevin, and thanks for the demo too. I think that was a helpful overview and a good visualization of how cloud and other types of ERP systems can help streamline an organization, pull together common data, standardize processes, and just make a company overall more effective and efficient. Just to share some additional thoughts around cloud and just building on the conversation that Kevin and Chris and I had earlier before the demo, I wanted to chat just about a few other dimensions of cloud ERP. And just to give you some background or a story from early in my career, when I first started in consulting back in the 90s, I was working for one of the big consulting firms, one of the big 5 consulting firms, doing a software evaluation and selection, and then ultimately an implementation. And this was for Lucent Technologies. They were at the time, and I believe still are, a engineer-to-order manufacturing organization, pretty big company, and now they're called Avaya, or part of Avaya. And at the time, they were going through some pretty complex business process reengineering in terms of just figuring out new ways to implement technology to support those new processes. And in my time there, when I first got involved with that project, we were doing a software evaluation and selection, and I was pretty excited because I was, my early to mid 20s, had just started out in consulting, was pretty excited to help through the software evaluation. And when we got through that, or not too far into the project, the partner from the firm told me, hey, here's the product we're recommending, before we would ever even completed the analysis or done any of the process improvements or really defined the needs. And it was a little discouraging at the time, being that young and naive, especially to realize that the answer was already kind of predefined, and that we as a consulting organization were being paid to give a recommendation that was already predefined. And the reason I share that story is because that tells the story of third stage and a little bit about my background. I started my career, like I said, back at one of the big 5 firms, and early in my career recognized that there weren't any independent consulting firms out there that represented clients' best interest rather than vendors' best interest. So I started a company in 2005 called Panorama Consulting, and that was at the time really one of the first, if not the first, truly independent ERP consulting firms. And I ran that company for about 13 years, brought on a couple business partners, and ultimately decided to leave that organization and start a new company that focused more on the entire digital transformation rather than just software selection. I wanted to create a firm that focused on everything from digital strategy through execution. So I started Third Stage Consulting after leaving Panorama, and really our whole focus of an organization is really helping clients realize the third stage of ERP. And what I mean by that is most organizations get bogged down somewhere in one of the first two phases. Either they have trouble implementing or don't really get the project off the ground, or they don't realize the benefits they expect and they go over time and budget. And there's some clear best practices that help clients reach that third stage. And that's really what we focus on as an organization, is helping clients select and implement technology to help them reach that third stage of ERP. And so as it relates to today's conversation in the cloud ERP world, We talked about this a little bit before, but in terms of how we deploy cloud ERP, and you saw the demo of Oracle NetSuite. If we were to choose a product like Oracle NetSuite, how would we deploy that? And Kevin asked the question earlier about big bang versus phased, and small and mid-sized companies generally are going to find big bang cloud deployments more palatable. So generally they'll find that, they don't have the baggage, so to speak, of past broken business processes or outdated technologies or a ton of data that needs to be cleansed. They're able to start with a clean slate a little bit easier than a larger organization. So big bang approaches where you go live with all of your functionality on day one tends to be more palatable for small and mid-sized companies. Larger organizations in general, every company's a little bit different, but in general, most larger organizations we find will phase their rollouts. And I mentioned this before, but it's a really important one in that cloud deployments themselves don't shorten the hardest part of transformation. And, on the surface, you look at cloud technology and you think, this is great. I don't need to worry about building out my IT department. Although, like Chris mentioned earlier, which is a really good point, it doesn't completely do away with not having to have an IT infrastructure, but it does, it does help certainly streamline things. So on the surface, you'd think, okay, cloud deployments are going to be a lot quicker, a lot faster, a lot cheaper. And in some ways that's true, at least on the technology side. But when it comes to the people, the change management, new business processes, new operating models, those are really important. Just a quick example of a company that we're working with that's a pretty big organization, a food manufacturing company that's about to implement a cloud solution. And we actually made the recommendation to them that, okay, here's the product you should implement, but we don't recommend you do this quite yet. We recommend that you wait to implement until you've kind of figured out your processes, your people, what's your operating model going to be, and then start implementing, after a few weeks or months after you've defined some of that stuff or made some decisions around that. And what that does is it actually makes your deployment go a lot more smoothly. You've made all those major decisions and you're able to leverage the benefits of cloud systems a little bit more effectively. So in addition to deployment models, we also look at flexibility. So what is the level of flexibility with cloud ERP? Now, this is all relatively speaking, but cloud ERP in general can be less flexible than on-premise in theory, which can be good or bad. And what I mean by that is, if you think about a typical historic on-premise solution, you could buy the software, install it on your hard drive, and or on your internal servers, and you could decide to change that software to do whatever it is you wanted. It might be super complicated and expensive and risky to do it, but you could do it. The thing with cloud that can be a double-edged sword is that it forces a certain amount of discipline and standardization and consistent business processes, which most companies want inherently, but it can be painful for people to adjust to. So the real thing to think about is, by forcing that discipline and that level of common business processes in your organization, it's probably going to simplify things. It may be the best thing for you long term, and it might be the right answer. But you just have to recognize that now you are inherently going to force the business to adapt to the software, whereas before you might have been used to adapting the software to the business. And the downside of not going with a cloud solution, so if you were to go with an on-premise solution, you do have more flexibility, but that flexibility has a dark side as well, in that people start to customize and change the software just because they can, and they use that as an excuse to pave the cow paths or to just do things the way they always have. So that's a really important point of recognition, is recognizing that each has its pros and cons, and you really have to look at what do you want to accomplish as an organization and what makes the most sense for you. And one last point on this is that I mentioned that I hedged a little bit in my first comment about cloud, how cloud can be less flexible. That gap between the flexibility of cloud versus on-premise is shrinking pretty rapidly as cloud vendors develop more flexible configuration, customization, integration tools. It is becoming a lot more flexible, certainly than when NetSuite, for example, first started in the late 90s, early 2000s. There wasn't a ton of flexibility there, but now you look at it and it's almost like a different product with a lot more flexibility than it did before. So just using that as a data point or one example, these cloud solutions are becoming much more flexible over time. We talked a bit too about cloud ERP, the single instance versus best of breed. We see a lot of our organizations, especially our larger companies that are multinational, that have grown through acquisition or have multiple subsidiaries. We have one client, for example, that has over 30 different subsidiaries or divisions within the company. And they're finding in this case that having this two-tier approach makes a lot of sense, where you've got, one kind of corporate back office backbone that's the single source of truth, at least at a consolidated level, and then the different divisions or different parts of the business distributed could potentially have their own different systems. Now, that's not always the right answer. There's a lot of messiness that goes along with that, but it is a possibility in today's day and age to have that two-tier approach. So really, it just depends on whether you're looking for really forcing a certain amount of standardization and centralization and common operating models and common organizational design, shared services. If you're going that route, it probably makes more sense to go with a single instance of a single cloud or ERP system. But if you value that flexibility, you plan to remain decentralized, then it could make sense to pursue that two-tier approach. But the good news is you have options. I mean, the tools today allow you a lot of different options, which can be overwhelming at times, but once you define what your strategy is and you translate that strategy into an overall digital strategy, which is what we help our clients do, it becomes a lot easier to develop a plan that makes sense for you. And then we look at internal cloud capabilities. The pros are that it's self-service, easy to use, provides efficiencies from a common operating and support platform. So those are some of the benefits of that approach. And then the downside is it entails a different skill set than what you might have in-house. So supporting a cloud solution looks a little bit different, and usually it looks a little bit lighter in terms of the support you need. And it usually allows you to distribute or decentralize the support a bit more to where you can have business users now creating their own reports and changing the color of that, the background screen or the button that they want to have look a little bit different. They can personalize things a little bit more. So that's one of the upsides is that there's more flexibility there. But the downside for all of this is that it does create change within your organization, and that's why that organizational change component is so important, and that's why that's such a big part of what we focus on and what I've focused on throughout my career is on the organizational change side of things. And then we have, when we look at data, ERP is still largely able to be that single source of truth with emerging technologies, distributed data. I mentioned that before, that it can, ERP has always kind of played that role, and it continues to be playing that role, and it continues to evolve to support Internet of Things and e-commerce, artificial intelligence, whatever trend of choice you want to talk about. Chances are the ERP systems are doing something to tie that in. So if anything, that creates more opportunities for value and optimization, and cloud solutions are often in a better position to better capture this data from various sources. And then finally, one last thing I'll mention before passing it back to Kevin is that we found over the last year or two that the cloud adoption has really reached a tipping point now. For a few years, there was a lot of hype behind it, but the actual adoption in the marketplace wasn't quite there yet, especially with mid-sized or larger organizations. But now what we're seeing is that so much activity is focused on cloud, whether it be the R&D that companies are spending in cloud solutions, or the investors wanting to invest more money in cloud vendors because there's more of a return for them and steadier revenue and higher margins over the long term. That money and R&D focus has really tipped things in favor of cloud, and now certainly customers are finally recognizing that there is a lot of value, and there can be a lot of value in cloud adoption. And probably the biggest thing for the tipping point is this last bullet around CIOs and CFOs and other executives are finally overcoming that fear of letting go of their on-premise systems. For a long time, a lot of our clients would not want to go down the cloud path because they just didn't like the idea of having to let go of their data or their systems or have someone else manage their infrastructures. And finally, companies are recognizing that there is some value in that. There are some definite upsides to that. So we really find that this is really the year, we've kind of defined 2018 to 2020, this period we're in right now, that tipping point of adoption where on-premise may not go away completely anytime soon, but certainly the majority of organizations implementing something are going down the path of cloud. So with all that being said, I'll pass it back to you, Kevin.
Well, thanks, Eric. Before we turn to Chris, let me ask you one additional question. I couldn't help but notice in my inbox this morning that you had a blog or some other type of publication that you had just released. And some of the questions that you were answering there touch on our topic today. So I'd ask you to briefly answer some of that. And you said, how do we define what the future state of the business processes are going to be? And secondly, how much detail do you need to go into before, as you say, you're ready to actually choose what kind of a system is most appropriate?
Sure, and thanks for citing that email and blog. One of the big questions is when and how do you define your business processes going into a software evaluation or certainly an implementation. And long story short, at some point you're going to have to define all of your business processes down to the workflow detail, transactions, what screens you use. And obviously, in order to design and test and train people, you're going to have to get down to that level of detail. But in terms of when we're evaluating systems or we're getting ready to implement our chosen system, at what level of detail do we get into, which is what you're asking. And really, what we suggest is that there's certain business processes you do that you want to make sure you're clear on and you have alignment on. That it doesn't matter if you're using, an Oracle NetSuite, another modern ERP system, or whether you're using a pen and paper. There's just certain things you as an organization need to do and need to focus on. So a lot of times there's a lot of value in defining what those processes are, what they look like, what that means to our business requirements, how we're going to evaluate the potential options we have, how we're going to prioritize those requirements, and ultimately how are we going to design whatever system we pick to support those processes. So generally, we advise our clients to define those business processes in a technology agnostic way, not yet getting into detail of what screen am I doing, what buttons am I pushing, which is very technology dependent, but defining those high-level processes first. And then when you get down to those more granular processes, that's where the technology is really going to enable a lot of improvements that you would never even think of, or you may never think of to implement within your organizations.
Good. Thanks, Eric. Chris, welcome back. Without further ado, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And what we've seen in the market space is it's very important for organizations to create a digital strategy and really map out the future before they actually start going into these process improvements in the software selection, understand where they are today, where they want to go. And that includes maps about ERP roadmaps, people, and process maps, as Eric had mentioned. What we're seeing in the market space here, that small organizations, they're very manual in what they do in their processes. They have that hero type mentality where everybody's very diligent and great customer service, but just think of how often people are going back and forth from their desk to a file cabinet over to the manager's desk for an approval or for some research on some documentation, whatnot. Very little automation and small use of technology, low use of technology there. This usually comes at a higher cost to operate in this manner. This getting through the grunt work and doing everything manual here. As you go to small and medium-sized companies, small, a little bit bigger, and medium-sized companies, they tend to be a little bit more automated. They do have some more standard operating procedures in place, and technology, typically addresses the needs as they arise. For example, small, medium-sized organizations, they may have a problem around warehousing, they may have a problem around shop floor control, and they're going to go out and purchase some niche applications and implement those and hopefully receive some benefits, but they don't necessarily look at that big picture and what kind of an ERP, end-to-end ERP could possibly get them. So it kind of leads to more of a best of breed approach. It's difficult to maintain data with disparate systems and that best of breed mentality, and it still kind of comes at a more of a higher cost to maintain there. Then when you look at larger organizations, they tend to have more best practices in place. They are more standardized. They certainly leverage technology and leverage integrated technology more than mid-sized companies, and they're using that to grow as opposed to human, people, capital, and power. Adopting these advanced functionality as well. What you see from large organizations and a technology standpoint. Usually they have a decent ERP implemented, and then they're using additional functionalities such as advanced shop floor control, maybe planning and advanced planning and scheduling, or even demand forecasting there. And that's how they're, continuing to grow and continuing to differentiate themselves, from their competition. And then, as Eric had mentioned, change management, one of the most important critical things to any project or ERP implementation. Everyone across the board is resistant to change, always resistant, it seems like, even if they say that they want it and even if they say that they're ready for it, usually everyone's resistant to that change in one manner or another. From a customization standpoint, it's critical to understand where it fits in the puzzle, of ERP. So, one, why do we need customization? Once we really peel back the onion, usually, again, it's workarounds, and usually it's the old type of thinking that has led us to this customization. So we may not need to do that as we're operating in more of a best practice manner as we implement these systems. But it's important to understand how the vendor accomplishes this, what skill sets are needed from a subject matter expert perspective or a IT perspective. And do companies right now, as you're selecting new software, do you already have that skill set in place where you can, lead yourself to be more sufficient? You need to look at the functional areas as well. Now, usually, finances and AP and AR, usually those are pretty simple and straightforward and can lead to a standardized implementation. The complexity happens around supply chain management and in the manufacturing process, whether it be internally or contracted, and a hybrid approach there. So we have to understand where the complexity lies and where we actually want to take on some of these customizations. Now, from a best practice standpoint, it really is important to understand each of the vendors and their variation in best practices. For example, Netsuite, that we just saw a very good brief overview of. Netsuite is the SaaS innovator. They were first to the market with SaaS. It's the only platform they have as a software as a service. So they've actually been developing these best practices for many years internally and deploying them into their system. Other vendors are converting their applications one way or another to the SaaS model, and they may not have all the resources. They may not have the all the internal processes aligned. They have to recreate functionality. Therefore, they're having to recreate some of those out-of-the-box processes as well. So understanding, the maturity of the cloud, each of these vendors is very important, and where they're going, in the future. Standardization versus best practice here. Again, it's critical to understand where the gaps are. The vendors are going to try to come in and you should implement as many out-of-the-box processes as you can, but there are certain things that you may not be able to take right out of the box. So you need to understand what the gaps are and how you're going to approach, either customizing the system or changing your internal processes. Reducing that gap and taking more out of the box processes certainly reduce risk of implementation, reduce the cost and the duration of implementation as well. When these vendors come in, they're, as Eric had mentioned, you're going to design processes at some point, and the vendors will come in and they'll do a design approach that is kind of a little bit biased towards their software. So they're going to be asking you, why not? Why can't you do it this way? Why can't you do it that way, and whatnot? So again, it's just critical to understand and have a roadmap going into each of these projects. And from a platform standpoint, we see security as really the number one, resistance in the market space. As Eric mentioned, it's certainly a tipping point to the cloud here. Security is always a concern, especially with smaller manufacturing companies that, don't want their data or their processes leaked or to be exposed in any way. So looking at a single tenant versus a multi-tenant, that actually, is another layer of security that's a good possibility with most of these vendors. And then when you're looking at, a vendor, what we're seeing a lot in this market space and mid-sized companies and larger organizations, that they're looking at a vendor and they've got prioritized areas and functionality, for example, ERP versus a product lifecycle management versus a supply chain management application versus maybe a warehouse automation application. You need to understand where you're going to receive benefits how can we get these applications in a timely manner, and then what's the real priority. And then you're also looking at the big picture of that vendor. Does the vendor offer these other products, these ancillary products that maybe not are high priority for us, but that we're going to need down the road here. And then as you know, this platform focusing on the upside, not the downside, you know, fleshing out what the real benefits are of going to the cloud versus, you know, what are the benefits of staying on-prem. It's just a different way of looking at things. And then the digital transformation is certainly, you know, as we've mentioned, is certainly a marketing and a very big buzz term going around. We have to understand what that is. And digital transformation, the transformation part is actually when companies are reaching across new industries, they're trying to develop new revenue streams. That's what true transformation is. Most of our companies are in an optimization mode where they're optimizing processes, then they're going to be leveraging and aligning technology to help facilitate and support those optimized processes. You know, few companies are really truly in digital transformation. So it's important to peel back the onion and understand what that is. And then lastly here, you know, technology as an enabler. You need to enable and support your improved processes and your optimized processes with technology. It's you know, one piece of kind of that three-legged stool there. I would also encourage people to have a very good relationship with their vendor and their provider, just to know you know, the right contacts from a service and sales standpoint, and really making sure that you're on their radar for process improvements and really, you know, getting things in a upgraded mode or enhancement requests. Again, it's important to have that relationship with the vendor there. And Kevin, with that, pass it back to you.
Well, thanks, Chris. I've got time for one more question for each of you. Chris, my question to you is, besides user adoption and executive sponsorship, what tends to be the most challenging part of an implementation?
Yeah, it's certainly the change management, in my opinion. For example, when you look at somebody on the shop floor and they know that you're implementing new technology right away. They think that their job may not be as important, their role may not be needed. So it's very important to communicate the purpose of these projects, to educate them on the new software, to set expectations around their use of the system, and say, hey, well, you know, we really are not looking to replace you. We're looking to maximize, you know, your expertise and your efficiency. So I think that change management, and that's one example, you know, just from a shop floor standpoint.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us today, Chris. I really appreciated it. Eric, the final question for you is, would you rather work in the process industries or in a discrete manufacturing environment for implementing an ERP system? Which do you think is more challenging? Which do you think is more interesting?
Wow, that's a loaded question, Kevin. I guess I'd say that, you know, the one that I think is most challenging, I'll start there. I mean, they're both challenging in different ways, but process manufacturing tends to create a certain amount of complexities in supply chain and manufacturing operations that, you know, aren't just unique, but it can challenge ERP systems as it relates to units of measure and everything upstream and downstream as it relates to everything from planning and forecasting all the way through, you know, procurement and manufacturing and order entry and shipping and everything. So I think that's just because of the nuances of the different units of measure in process manufacturing. I think that's, in my mind, creates a lot of wrinkles that you don't see in other types of manufacturing. As far as the one I like, I can't really pick one. I just like working in manufacturing and industry. So I started out in the kind of the engineer to order discrete manufacturing space, but I love working in process manufacturing too. So I'm gonna have to hedge on that or pass on that question, Kevin, because I don't have a good answer for you.
All right. Well, it certainly is interesting how the difference between how big a difference it makes, the difference between how many and how much, which kind of runs through a lot of things, and you really find it expressed in an enterprise system. In any case, that's all the questions we have time for today. Thanks to our expert panelists. I thought it was a great presentation, and thanks to our audience for signing on and sticking with us through the entire thing. I think that's a sign of the fact that it was a good webinar. For more we hope it suited your purposes. For more information, go to the website links noted in the interface. I'd like to thank our sponsors for supporting today's webcast. And now that we're just about done, we want to hear how we did. The exit survey will pop up on your screen as soon as this webcast ends. Please take a moment to complete it as we use this information to improve our products. On behalf of CFE Media, thanks for attending, and we'll see you next time.